I never thought of myself as paranoid. My wife, Sophia, used to joke that I was so trusting I'd leave the front door open for a burglar. But in the last few months, something had shifted. Little things, barely perceptible, started to gnaw at me. Sophia and I had been married for 6 years. She taught art at a local community college, her passion spilling into every corner of our home. Our walls were adorned with her oil paintings, landscapes, abstract pieces, even a portrait of me she'd done one lazy Sunday afternoon. She was vibrant, creative, and the kind of person who could draw strangers into her orbit with nothing more than a laugh. I worked in finance. Not glamorous, but steady. My life was a grid of numbers and spreadsheets, a stark contrast to Sophia's swirling colors and chaotic beauty. Despite our differences, we worked. At least I thought we did. The first sign was the phone. Sophia had always been glued to her screen, but lately her behavior had changed. She'd startle whenever I entered the room, quickly locking it or flipping it over. "Work emails," she'd say, flashing me a dismissive smile. "You know how it is." I nodded. I did know how it was, or at least I thought I did. Then came the gallery trips. Sophia had always loved art exhibitions, but her outings had become more frequent and longer. When I offered to join her, she'd wave me off with an airy, "Oh, it's just networking. You'd be bored to tears." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were still the team we'd always been. But the distance between us was growing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a cliff I hadn't realized was there. It wasn't until I found the receipt that the first thread began to unravel. I'd been looking for my gym membership card when I stumbled across it in her bag. A receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant I'd never heard of. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and a dessert. I stared at the receipt, my stomach twisting. Sophia hated eating out without me. She always said it felt wrong. Yet here it was, dated 2 nights ago, while I'd been working late to wrap up a quarterly report. When I confronted her, she barely blinked. "Oh, that," she said, brushing past me to the kitchen. "It was just dinner with a gallery curator. I told you about it, didn't I?" "No," I said, holding up the receipt. "You didn't." She laughed. A little too loud, a little too forced. "Well, now you know. Nothing to worry about." But I was worried, because for the first time in our marriage, I didn't believe her. After that conversation, Sophia's behavior only grew more erratic. She became guarded, like she was walking on eggshells around me, or maybe herself. A week after the dinner receipt incident, I noticed another anomaly. Her wardrobe. Sophia had always dressed with a casual elegance. Flowy skirts, sweaters spattered with paint, the occasional sundress. But suddenly there were new additions. Expensive pieces. A sleek black dress that hugged her figure in a way she usually avoided. Designer heels I knew we couldn't afford on her teaching salary. "You like it?" she asked one evening, spinning in front of the mirror. The dress shimmered under the soft light of our bedroom. "It's for a gallery opening. Networking again." I nodded slowly, watching her apply lipstick in the mirror. "Who's hosting this one?" "Someone new in town," she said without meeting my eyes. "An up-and-coming collector." "Name?" I asked casually as I could. Her hand faltered on the lipstick. Vincent something. It's not important." Her tone was airy, dismissive, but her body language screamed the opposite. She was hiding something, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, while she was in the shower, I unlocked her laptop. We'd always been open with passwords, but it felt wrong anyway, like crossing some invisible line. Still, I pushed forward, telling myself I just needed a hint, a shred of clarity to prove I was overreacting. Instead, I found an email chain. The subject line read, "Our little secret." The sender was someone named A. Lauron, an address I didn't recognize. The emails were brief but intimate, littered with inside jokes I didn't understand and phrases that twisted my gut. "I can't wait to see you again. You looked stunning last night. Does he suspect anything?" I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. My logical mind tried to piece together an innocent explanation, but there was none. Sophia was lying to me, When she came to bed, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. My chest burned with anger and betrayal, but I needed more than an email to accuse her. In the days that followed, I started paying closer attention. The gallery openings, the phone calls taken in whispered tones, the nights she came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I wasn't imagining it. Sophia was slipping through my fingers, and I needed to know who or what was pulling her away. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One night, she left for another event, claiming she'd be home late. Instead of heading to bed, I grabbed my coat and waited until her car disappeared down the street. Then I followed. I trailed Sophia's car from a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I told myself I needed to do this, to confirm what I already suspected. Still, I felt like I was stepping into a dark corner of our marriage, a place I wasn't supposed to see. She drove across town to an upscale neighborhood I didn't recognize. The streets were lined with luxury cars, and the houses glowed with the kind of wealth that was worlds away from our modest two-bedroom home. Sophia parked outside a large estate, its modern architecture bathed in warm light. For a moment I considered turning back. Maybe I didn't want to know what was inside that house. But my feet moved before my mind could catch up, and soon I was crouched in the shadows of a perfectly manicured hedge, watching her through the wide windows of the house. Inside, a small crowd mingled around an art display. Sophia stood at the center of it, laughing, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you could buy and sell everyone in the room. He leaned in close to Sophia, whispering something that made her laugh, a sound that used to be mine. The way she looked at him, with a mixture of admiration and longing, was like a dagger to my chest. I stayed rooted to the spot, unable to move, as the evening unfolded. They moved together like a pair of dancers, fluid and familiar, their connection undeniable. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and despair. When the man placed his hand on Sophia's lower back and guided her toward a side room, I nearly burst in after them. But I stopped myself, knowing I needed to stay calm, to think. I waited until they disappeared behind the door, then slipped away. Back in my car, I stared at the photos, my mind racing. I didn't know the man's name, but I knew what he was. He wasn't just a curator or a gallery owner. He was the reason Sophia had changed, the reason she'd drifted from me. I drove home in silence, my thoughts swirling with anger, pain, and an undeniable thirst for answers. The next morning I began my search. I uploaded the photos to my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long to find him. His name was Adrien Laurent, a renowned art collector with a reputation for charm and ruthlessness. He was known for acquiring rare pieces by any means necessary, legal or otherwise. And now it seemed he'd acquired my wife. I spent the next few days consumed by research, piecing together Adrien Laurent's life like a detective unraveling a crime scene. The man was a ghost, his public persona carefully curated. He was wealthy, connected, and, most damning of all, unscrupulous. Stories of underhanded deals and ruined artists followed him like a shadow. But what stood out most were the whispers of his charm. He had a way of drawing people in, making them feel seen, special. It was easy to see how Sophia might have fallen under his spell. Despite my anger, I didn't confront her right away. I needed to understand the depth of their relationship, to know how far things had gone. That meant playing my part, the trusting husband who noticed nothing. Sophia, for her part, was either oblivious to my growing suspicions or too confident to care. She continued her charade, coming home late with vague excuses about work and opportunities. "Adrien's really impressed with my pieces," she said one evening over dinner. "He thinks I could sell a few at his next showcase." I forced a smile, hiding the bile rising in my throat. "That's great. Sophomore sounds like he really believes in you." She nodded enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. "He's amazing, David. You'd like him. He's got this vision, you know? He sees art the way it's meant to be seen." I clenched my fork so tightly I thought it might snap. I'm sure he does. After dinner, while she showered, I scrolled through her phone. It had taken me weeks to guess her new passcode. A combination of numbers that, when cracked, spelled Adrian on a keypad. The texts between them were nauseating. They weren't just flirty or suggestive. They were intimate. They spoke of plans, secrets, and emotions that left no doubt in my mind. Adrian, I'll have the paperwork ready by next week. Once it's in your name, it's yours. Sophia, you're too good to me. He doesn't deserve this. Adrian, he'll never see it coming. What did they mean by paperwork? In her name? It didn't take long to figure it out. I checked our shared bank accounts and discovered a recent withdrawal of $10,000. A withdrawal I hadn't made. My inheritance from my late father, money Sophia had always said we'd use to build a future, was disappearing in chunks. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to strip me bare. That night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling as my mind churned. The woman I'd loved, the one I'd built a life with, wasn't just betraying me emotionally. She was conspiring with a con artist to rob me. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I wouldn't be the fool they walked over. If they thought I was just going to sit back and watch them dismantle my life, they didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't just angry. I was ready. Once I knew their game, I started planning mine. Sophia and Adrian had no idea I was onto them, and I intended to keep it that way. If Adrian was as cunning as his reputation suggested, he'd sniff out any suspicion. I needed to be careful, methodical, just like in chess, where the opening move sets the tone for the whole match. I started small, taking steps to protect myself. The first was securing my finances. I transferred the remaining inheritance to an account under my name only, one Sophia didn't know existed. Next, I placed a hold on all joint credit cards, citing potential fraud. If she tried to make another large withdrawal, it would flag me immediately. Then I reached out to a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Carla. She specialized in digging up dirt, and I had no doubt she'd find whatever I needed. Infidelity is one thing, she said during our initial call. But theft? That's a whole new level. If they're conspiring, we'll nail them. Her confidence was reassuring. Within days, she was feeding me information about Adrian, his shady dealings, offshore accounts, and a history of manipulating women into schemes just like this one. It wasn't his first time, but I was determined it would be his last. Meanwhile, I kept my facade intact. I went to work, came home, and played the role of the oblivious husband. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Sophia casually mentioned Adrian again. He's helping me put together a portfolio, she said, scrolling through her phone. He says I have real potential. That's amazing, Soph, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Maybe we should have him over for dinner sometime. I'd love to meet the man who's been so supportive. Her hand froze for just a moment before she laughed. Oh, he's too busy for that. Always flying somewhere or hosting some event. But I'll ask. Her hesitation confirmed what I already knew. She didn't want Adrian and me in the same room. A few nights later, I got the break I needed. Carla sent me a batch of photos, Sophia and Adrian together at a swanky hotel downtown. The timestamps matched the nights she'd claimed to be at gallery openings. But the final nail was a document Carla uncovered. A property transfer agreement. Adrian was putting a piece of art, an abstract worth 6 figures, in Sophia's name. It wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a shield. If his shady dealings ever caught up to him, the artwork would be safely out of reach, protected by my wife. They thought they were clever, but they were playing right into my hands. With the evidence in place, I began crafting the perfect revenge. It wouldn't be impulsive or violent. No, that was too easy. It needed to be calculated, precise. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own betrayal, to watch as the world they were building came crashing down around them. And it would all start at the gallery. If Sophia and Adrian thought they were the only ones who could play games, they were sorely mistaken. The gallery opening they were planning for was my perfect opportunity to strike. It was set to be a high-profile event, with collectors, critics, and even local media in attendance. The stakes couldn't have been higher. First, I made sure my role in their scheme remained invisible. Every evening, I let Sophia babble about her portfolio and Adrian's mentorship, nodding and smiling like a supportive husband. Inside, I burned with anticipation, knowing that their downfall was already in motion. I enlisted Carla to dig further into Adrian's activities. I wanted to understand the depths of his deception, and more importantly, how to use his ego against him. He was a man who thrived on appearances, someone who valued his reputation as much as his wealth. Destroying one would mean obliterating the other. Carla uncovered more than I could have imagined. Adrian's art collection was a facade. Much of his inventory was either forged or procured through shady deals. He manipulated his lovers into laundering money or storing assets under their names to shield himself from legal trouble. Sophia was just the latest in a long line of marks. But the piece de resistance came when Carla found a paper trail linking Adrian to a counterfeit art ring. Documents, emails, and even witness statements showed his involvement in swapping real paintings with fakes, often selling the genuine pieces overseas for astronomical sums. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse, and I had just the push it needed. Next, I started reaching out to the right people: journalists, lawyers, even a few rival collectors Adrian had wronged in the past. They were more than willing to lend a hand when I shared what Carla had found. By the time the gallery event rolled around, the stage was set, and every player was in position. To complete my plan, I needed to play the doting husband one last time. I surprised Sophia with a gift, a dress for the event. "It's perfect," she said, holding it up to the mirror. Her smile was radiant, but I saw through it now. She wasn't smiling for me. "You're going to steal the show," I said, my voice calm. "Adrian won't know what hit him." The irony of my words made it almost impossible to keep a straight face. The night of the gallery opening arrived, and Sophia was positively glowing as we walked into the venue together. She dressed to impress, and from the looks she was getting, it was working. Adrian greeted her warmly at the entrance, his hand lingering a little too long on her lower back. "David," Adrian said, extending a hand. "So good to finally meet you." The audacity of the man made my skin crawl, but I smiled and shook his hand firmly. "Likewise, I've heard a lot about you." "And I about you," he replied, his tone dripping with charm. "You're a lucky man to have Sophia." "Luckier than you know," I said, matching his tone. I excused myself and began weaving through the crowd, mingling and making small talk while keeping one eye on Sophia and Adrian. They were basking in the glow of their success, completely unaware that their perfect evening was about to unravel. At precisely 9 p.m., the gallery's centerpiece, a six-figure abstract painting Adrian had transferred into Sophia's name, was unveiled. The applause was deafening, but I hardly heard it. My heart was pounding in anticipation. It was time to strike. As the crowd gathered around the unveiled painting, a dramatic piece splashed with deep reds and chaotic blacks, Adrian stood proudly beside Sophia. He was in his element, basking in the admiration of his audience. Sophia looked radiant, her arm casually looped through his, a silent declaration of their partnership, personal and professional. I watched from the edge of the room, allowing the scene to marinate in its self-satisfaction. Then, with perfect timing, I nodded to Carla, who had taken her position near the gallery's event coordinator. Within moments, the gallery's overhead speakers crackled to life, silencing the hum of the crowd. A voice spoke clearly over the PA system, my voice. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," it began. "Thank you for coming to celebrate the unveiling of Adrian Lawrence's latest acquisition. But before you continue applauding, there are some things you should know about the man of the hour and his accomplice." The murmurs started immediately, heads turning as everyone tried to pinpoint the source of the voice. Adrian's confident smile faltered, and Sophia stiffened beside him. "Adrian Laurent," the recording continued, "is not the man you think he is. Behind the facade of luxury and charm lies a web of deception, fraud, and theft." Gasps rippled through the room as a large projector screen, hidden behind a curtain, lit up with the first of many damning images. Documentation of Adrian's counterfeit art sales, emails detailing his scams, and evidence of money laundering schemes. Carla had compiled it all into a devastating slideshow. Sophia turned to Adrian, her face pale. "What's going on?" she hissed, but he didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his composure cracking. The next slide appeared, and the crowd's collective gasp grew louder. It was an email exchange between Adrian and Sophia, the very ones I'd found on her laptop. Phrases like, "He'll never see it coming," and "once it's in your name," its hours blazed across the screen. The crowd began to murmur, voices growing louder as judgment filled the air. "Adrian," one of the collectors shouted. "What the hell is this? Is this a joke?" Adrian took a step forward, his hands raised in a futile attempt to calm the crowd. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice firm but strained. But the recording continued. "This isn't a misunderstanding," my voice said. "It's the truth. Adrian, Laurent, and Sophia, my wife, have been conspiring to steal my inheritance and use me as a pawn in their latest scam. But tonight, their game ends." I stepped into the spotlight at that moment, the crowd parting as I approached the center of the room. Adrian's face darkened as he saw me, his polished charm replaced with raw panic. "David," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "Hello, darling," I said, smiling coldly. "I thought it was time we all got reacquainted." Adrian's mask of control shattered. "You don't know what you're doing," he snapped. "Oh, I think I do," I replied, my voice steady. "The authorities have already been notified, and I've made sure every piece of evidence is in their hands. This is just the beginning, Adrian." The sound of sirens punctuated my words as police cars pulled up outside the gallery. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Sophia looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and desperation. "David, please, Save it," I said sharply, cutting her off. "You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences." The officers entered the gallery, and within moments, Adrian was being escorted out in handcuffs. His protests were loud and futile, drowned out by the whispers of betrayal and deceit swirling through the crowd. Sophia wasn't arrested yet, but her reputation was destroyed, her name now synonymous with Adrian's schemes. As the chaos unfolded around us, I turned to leave, the weight of betrayal finally lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. And as I walked out of the gallery, the cool night air filling my lungs, I knew I'd done just that. The silence in the car on the drive home was deafening. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, pale and trembling. I'd insisted she come with me, partly to keep her from trying to contact Adrian, but mostly to make her face the fallout of her betrayal. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't I? Tell me, Sophia, what exactly was I supposed to do? Let you and your lover bleed me dry while you laughed behind my back?" Her head snapped toward me, tears pooling in her eyes. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice sharp. "Tell me how it was. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were perfectly happy to sell me out." She looked away, her hands gripping the hem of her dress. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said after a long pause. "Adrian, he said it was just an investment opportunity, that the money would come back tenfold. I believed him." I slammed my palm against the steering wheel, the car swerving slightly. "Don't insult me, Sophia. This wasn't about investments. You knew exactly what you were doing." Her silence was answer enough. When we got home, I didn't wait for her to follow. I walked inside, heading straight to the bedroom to grab the suitcase I'd packed earlier. I tossed it onto the bed and turned to her as she stood frozen in the doorway. "You're leaving," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened. "David, please. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I interrupted. "You lied. You cheated. You tried to ruin me. We're done." She broke then, sinking to her knees as sobs racked her body. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she cried. "I got caught up in it. Adrian, he made me feel alive like I mattered. But I never stopped loving you. I swear. David, I didn't." I stared at her, my anger momentarily eclipsed by a pang of sadness. This was the woman I'd once built my life around, the person I trusted with everything. And now she was a stranger, someone capable of betrayal so deep it left scars I knew would never heal. "You didn't love me," I said quietly. "If you had, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have chosen him over us." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. "I'll fix it," she pleaded. "I'll do whatever it takes. Please, David, don't throw us away." I shook my head. "You already threw us away. I'm just cleaning up the mess." I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the floor. The sound followed me down the hall, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. That night, I slept on the couch, though sleep was a distant thought. My mind raced with everything that had happened, every moment that had led us to this point. By morning, Sophia was gone. The suitcase was missing, along with a few of her things. She'd left a note on the counter, a scribbled apology that meant nothing to me. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half and tossing it in the trash. This was the end of us. But it was also the beginning of something else, something better. The house was eerily quiet after Sophia left. Her absence should have felt like relief, but instead, it gnawed at me, leaving a hollow ache I couldn't shake. I had one. I'd exposed her and Adrian, dismantled their scheme, and protected myself. Yet I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lost. For days, I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid coming home to the empty house. But the memories followed me everywhere. The laughter we once shared, the plans we'd made for the future, the person I thought she was. Carla called a few days after the gallery fiasco with an update. "They've charged Adrian with fraud and money laundering," she said. "The evidence we handed over was airtight. He's looking at serious prison time." "And Sophia?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "She hasn't been charged yet," Carla admitted. "But the DA is keeping her under scrutiny. If they can prove she was complicit, she won't walk away unscathed." I thanked Carla and hung up, leaning back in my chair. The idea of Sophia facing legal consequences brought me no satisfaction. It wasn't revenge I craved anymore, it was closure. 2 weeks after the gallery event, I received an unexpected message from Sophia. It was a short, cryptic text. "Can we meet? Just once. I owe you an explanation." My first instinct was to delete it. What could she possibly say to justify what she'd done? But against my better judgment, I replied, "1 hour. Tomorrow. The cafe by the park." Sophia was already seated when I arrived at the cafe. She looked different, thinner, her face drawn with exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She glanced up as I approached, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and hope. "David," she said softly, standing as if to hug me. I held up a hand, stopping her. "Let's just talk." We sat in tense silence for a moment before she spoke. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to understand why I did it." "Go on," I said, crossing my arms. She swallowed hard, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. "Adrian wasn't just about the money," she admitted. "He made me feel seen, like I mattered in a way I hadn't felt in years." I raised an eyebrow. "And I didn't make you feel that way?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You did, David. You always did. But after so many years together, I got lost. I felt invisible, like I was just your wife, your partner, not my own person." I leaned back in my chair, her words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. "So your solution was to betray me? To steal from me? To conspire with a man like Adrian?" "I didn't mean for it to go so far," she said, her voice breaking. "At first, it was just lunches and conversations. But then Adrian started talking about investments, about how he could help me break free, and I believed him. I thought I was taking control of my life." I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman sitting before me with the person I had once loved. "You weren't taking control, Sophia. You were being used. By Adrian, by your own selfishness. And in the process, you destroyed everything we had." Her tears spilled over, but I felt nothing. "David," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm begging you, don't let this be the end. Please." I pulled my hand away, my jaw tightening. "This is the end, Sophia. There's nothing left to save." Her sobs followed me as I stood and walked away. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I realized that I didn't need Sophia's remorse or her excuses. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I had my closure, and now it was time to move forward. The days following my meeting with Sophia felt lighter. The confrontation, painful as it had been, gave me clarity. Her betrayal was no longer an unanswered question gnawing at my mind. It was a closed chapter. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. My first move was selling the house. It had become a monument to everything that had gone wrong. Every room held a memory I didn't want to revisit. I hired a realtor and started looking for something smaller, something new. Work became my refuge. Numbers and spreadsheets didn't lie. They didn't conspire against you. My boss noticed my renewed focus and offered me a shot at a promotion. It wasn't flashy, but it was stability, and for the first time in weeks I felt grounded. Yet, I knew I couldn't avoid the personal toll forever. The solitude at home was deafening, and the silence felt like both a punishment and a relief. It wasn't until Carla reached out again that I realized I needed to start truly living again. "I've closed Adrian's file," Carla said over the phone. "He's been denied bail. The DA's building a case. And with your evidence, it's ironclad." "Good," I replied. "I hope he rots." "There's one loose end, though," she added cautiously. "Sophia," I guessed. "Yes," Carla confirmed. "The DA isn't actively pursuing charges against her, but she's under investigation. If you want to push for more, now's the time." I paused. The idea of dragging Sophia further down the legal rabbit hole didn't sit well. She'd already lost everything. Her reputation, Adrian, and me. Was that enough? "I'll let it go," I said finally. "She's not worth more of my time." Carla hesitated before responding. "Smart choice. You've done enough damage to their little empire. Now it's time to focus on you." Her words struck a chord. For too long, my life had revolved around Sophia and Adrian's betrayal. It was time to reclaim it. The first step was reconnecting with the people I'd distanced myself from during my marriage. Friends I hadn't seen in years were surprised to hear from me, but they welcomed me back with open arms. It felt good to laugh again, to share beers and stories without the weight of Sophia's lies hanging over me. One night, a friend convinced me to attend a small networking event. It was nothing glamorous, just a local meetup for professionals, but it was the kind of thing I would have avoided while married. That's where I met Emma. She was nothing like Sophia. Where Sophia was vibrant and dramatic, Emma was calm and grounded. We struck up a conversation about travel. She was planning a trip to Italy, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting, and before I knew it, the evening had flown by. At the end of the night, she handed me her card with a warm smile. "Call me sometime," she said. It wasn't a date, not yet, but it was a start. A week later, Sophia contacted me one last time. It wasn't a plea or a confession, just a simple message. "Thank you for not pursuing charges. I hope one day you can forgive me." I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. "I'll never forget what you did, Sophia, but I won't let it define me. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Goodbye." And with that, I blocked her number. Moving forward wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a small apartment on the edge of town, a place with no memories attached to it. Slowly, I began piecing my life back together, one step at a time. The scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight, but they became a part of my story, something I could look at without flinching. And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't destroying Sophia or Adrian. It was building a life they could never touch. My new apartment felt like a blank canvas. It was smaller, simpler, and quieter than the house Sophia and I had shared, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was creating a space for myself rather than accommodating someone else's vision. I started developing new habits. Morning jogs at the park, evenings spent reading books I'd been meaning to get to, and trying my hand at cooking more than just basic meals. There was a sense of satisfaction in these small acts of self-care, a reminder that I was capable of building something new. Work continued to thrive. My promotion came through, and with it, a chance to manage a team. It was a challenge, but one I welcomed. The focus on leadership distracted me from the lingering wounds of betrayal, giving me a renewed sense of purpose. And then there was Emma. We started slowly, coffee one weekend, a walk through the city another. Emma was warm, curious, and surprisingly straightforward. She asked questions about my life, my work, and my interests, but never pried into the parts one wasn't ready to share. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, her presence a calming contrast to the chaos I just escaped. One evening, we met at a wine bar she'd suggested. The conversation flowed easily, laughter bubbling between us. At one point, she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing playfully. "You're holding something back, David," she said. I hesitated. "I've been through a lot lately." Her expression softened. I figured, you don't have to tell me everything right now. But when you're ready, I'm here. Those words, so simple and sincere, eased a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. As Emma and I grew closer, Sophia's presence in my life began to fade, but it didn't disappear entirely. The legal proceedings against Adrian dragged on, and while Sophia wasn't charged, her name occasionally surfaced in updates Carla sent me. One email stood out. Carla. Sophia testified against Adrian in exchange for immunity. She gave the DA everything they needed to lock him up for good. Looks like he's going away for at least a decade. I stared at the email, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. Relief that Adrian would face justice. Sadness that Sophia had once again chosen self-preservation over integrity. I closed the email and chose not to reply. A month later, Emma and I found ourselves at a local art gallery. I hadn't been to one since the night of Adrian's downfall, but Emma's enthusiasm was infectious. As we wandered through the exhibits, I felt a pang of nostalgia. The abstract pieces, the quiet hum of conversation, the smell of fresh paint. It all reminded me of the life I'd shared with Sophia. But this time it didn't hurt. Emma stopped in front of a small painting, her head tilting thoughtfully. "What do you think?" she asked. I studied the piece, a simple but striking composition of blues and grays. It felt peaceful, grounded, and steady. "I think it's beautiful," I said. She smiled, taking my hand. "Me too." In that moment, I realized something. My past didn't define me anymore. It was a part of me, yes, but it didn't control my future. I was free to create something new, something better. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. As my connection with Emma deepened, I found myself wrestling with something I hadn't anticipated. Trust. Sophia's betrayal had left scars, and while I tried to leave them behind, they lingered like shadows in the corners of my mind. There were moments when I'd catch myself second-guessing Emma's intentions, questioning her late-night texts or the way she sometimes glanced at her phone during dinner. They were innocent actions, but my bruised heart had trouble interpreting them that way. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, Emma seemed to sense my hesitation. "Something's on your mind," she said, pouring us both another glass of wine. I hesitated, weighing my words. "It's not you," I said finally. "It's me, or more accurately, my past." She sat down across from me, her expression patient. "You want to talk about it?" I took a deep breath. My last relationship ended badly. She lied to me, betrayed me in ways I didn't think were possible. And now, even though I know you're not her, I still find myself questioning things. It's not fair to you, and I hate that I do it. Emma reached out, placing her hand over mine. "David, I get it. Trust doesn't just snap back into place overnight. It takes time, and I'm okay with that. The fact that you're willing to be honest about it means more than you know." Her words felt like a balm on an old wound. For the first time, I realized that moving forward didn't mean ignoring the pain. It meant confronting it, piece by piece, and letting someone help me carry it. In the weeks that followed, I made a conscious effort to be present with Emma, to trust her without letting old fears cloud my judgment. It wasn't always easy, but she never made me feel like I was a burden. We started spending more time together, weekend hikes, quiet nights cooking at her place, even joining a local trivia league at her insistence. Slowly, the walls I'd built around myself began to come down. Emma didn't just tolerate my baggage. She helped me unpack it. One afternoon, while running errands downtown, I spotted a familiar figure outside a cafe. Sophia. She was sitting alone, staring down at a cup of coffee. She looked different, thinner, her hair cut shorter, her usual vibrant energy muted. For a moment, I considered walking past, pretending I hadn't seen her. But something stopped me. "David," she said, her eyes widening as I approached. "Hi, Sophia," I said evenly, keeping my tone neutral. She gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Do you have a minute?" I hesitated but sat down. "What's on your mind?" She studied me for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I wanted to say thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For not ruining me when you had the chance," she admitted. "I know I deserved worse than what I got. You could have pushed for charges, dragged my name through the mud. But you didn't. I've been trying to figure out why." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Because I didn't want to waste any more of my life on you," I said bluntly. "You made your choices, Sophia, and I made mine. I've moved on." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the table. "I've been trying to move on too, but it's not as easy as I thought it would be." "That's not my problem," I said, standing up. "You made your bed, Sophia. Now you have to lie in it." She looked up at me, a flicker of regret in her eyes.
I'm sorry, David.
"For everything." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Turning away, I walked out of the cafe, leaving Sophia behind for good. That evening, I told Emma about the encounter. "And how do you feel about it?" she asked, her tone gentle. I thought about it for a moment. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I've let it all go." She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Good. You deserve that." And in that moment I realized she was right. Weeks after seeing Sophia, I started to notice something. Her shadow didn't linger anymore. For the first time, thoughts of her didn't claw at my mind, and the pain of her betrayal had dulled into a distant memory. One day, I found an envelope in my mailbox. It was from Sophia. Inside was a single note. "I've started over. I hope you find happiness."
I'm truly sorry.
I read it twice, then tore it in half and threw it away. Whatever she was searching for wasn't my concern anymore. The final ghost of our life together was gone. Emma and I grew closer in ways that felt natural and unforced. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she asked, "What's next for you?" "Living," I said without hesitation. "And making something real." She smiled, her hand brushing mine. "Sounds like we're on the same page." For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't rebuilding. I was truly building. Months later, standing on the balcony of my new apartment, I reflected on how far I'd come. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, it had all shaped me but no longer defined me. Emma stepped outside, wrapping her arms around me. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I said, pulling her closer. The future wasn't certain, but it was mine. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it on my terms.